Very excited this morning. I had planned on doing something else as a summer mini-series, which I was excited about and I think would have been fruitful. Good morning, Diva crew. Good to see you. Hey, Kendall. But a few months ago, Elliot and I, we were talking about the church's core values, and that discussion quickly led to the conclusion that we haven't really talked much about them. In fact, as I was digging in, there was like two out of the four core values that I couldn't find anything even written on. And here we are, we're about to be in our 7th year as a church. And I've never preached a series on our core values, and I would imagine that some of you couldn't even repeat the four core values. I wish we would have had another banner made. I don't know why. We have our mission and vision, but I don't know why we don't have our values. And so you'll see a new banner here in the next few weeks with that. So I hope that this 4-part mini-series will not only encourage and inspire you, but really help us to be a church that continues to embody and embrace these 4 core values, which I believe, I've already shared with some of you this morning, that we already pretty much are, but you may not even know it. So I hope this will just encourage you. So first, our core values are part of what we call the vision frame. And you're like, oh, we call it that? Maybe none of you even know that term or have even seen the vision frame. We talk about this in our owner orientation, and we talk about the 4 walls of it, but I don't know that we necessarily use that terminology, but this is what we, at least we called at the very beginning, our vision frame, and I want to come back to that. This is something that Will Mancini, if you've ever heard of him, he was kind of a guest speaker in my doctoral studies. I got to know Will. He's an awesome, awesome guy down in Dallas, and runs an organization called Oxano now, really helping individuals and organizations, churches, really flesh out their vision, so to speak, clarify their vision. So picture 4 walls on a frame. You can see the picture behind me. We call it the vision frame. We look out the vision frame to see one thing. What we're trying to discern as we look out this frame is, where is God leading us? Where is God taking us? Where are we going on this thing called Restoration Church? The 4 sides of the vision frame are our mission, right? So mission is what we're doing. What are we doing? We're joining God in the restoration of all things. That's how we articulate our vision. And then our values to answer why. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Strategy is our how. How do we do that? Well, we have life-giving worship service, we have authentic community groups, and we bless the neighborhood. That's how we accomplish the mission. And our measures, we don't talk about that a whole lot necessarily. You've heard us talk about different pieces of it. We've really clearly articulated that in terms of Sunday, but really that is, how do we know, or when are we being successful? How do we know we're being successful? So for example, on Sunday mornings, we count the number of people in a room, we count our giving and all that kind of stuff, but there are 2 measures that we use to discern how our Sunday morning's going. And one of those is, are people getting involved to serve on Sunday morning? That's really important. If nobody's serving, then it's kind of like, speaking to the choir here or whatever. No, that's not the right way to put it, but it's like not very two-way. And then secondly, are people going from Sunday mornings into community groups? And so we want to define success on a Sunday. There's probably lots of other things, right? There's lots of other things that we could talk about, but really we want to see people moved. And I think I'm preaching to the choir because all of you are involved in those 2 ways. So every year when we celebrate our church anniversary, we unpack our mission and the story of Restoration Church, and we're going to do that this fall as we celebrate our 7th-year anniversary. And actually, Laura and I just talked about this yesterday. We are, this is way too early to announce this, but we've just been told in the last week that we're not going to be able to use the school on September 17th. And our board, we kind of made the decision. We had to do this kind of quickly. Okay, what do we do? They said, well, we can move you to another school. And then I'm like, well, if we move to another school, I don't know if we can bring our things in and out. That would be confusing. How about we just do another picnic? And then it just dawned on me yesterday, why don't we use that picnic as our anniversary picnic? And we'll just have a party and celebrate our 7th anniversary on September 17th. So that's coming. And we talk about that. I think you have heard us talk about the mission and a little bit of the vision and that kind of stuff. But we've never unpacked and taught our values. So I apologize. I don't know what in the world I've been thinking or not thinking or why we haven't done that. But this morning, we're going to begin doing that. By God's grace and for His glory, I think that you'll recognize you'll recognize their importance in the life of our church, some more than others, as we address our weak spots. Some more than others, and we are addressing our weak spots is what I meant to say. So that said, core value number 1 is authentic relationships. Of all the things that are crucial in a church, we determined at the very beginning that the most important thing is first and foremost that we emphasize that we have an authentic relationship with God, that we have an authentic relationship with one another and the people in the church, and that our reputation in the community is such that we have authentic relationships with people in our neighborhoods and communities. Actually, when we went through our church planting assessment, one of the things we had to do, one of the things that I had to submit was 2 character references from non-Christians about me. That was fun. That was awesome. One of them was my mechanic at the time. That was great. That was great. So here at Restoration Church, we believe that healthy relationships drive everything. We have our core value, and every core value has a tagline. So authentic relationships, the tagline is healthy relationships drive everything, right? I mean, that's pretty much true in any context of life. Most people who come and stay at Restoration Church talk about how quickly they felt loved and the church felt more like family. And that's really it, right? We want to be a family on mission. Now, each value, all right, I just mentioned that. Now, it's not that other churches, so when we say this is like our core value number 1, it's not that other churches, like their core value is to be fake or inauthentic. Nobody would say that. Some are, some aren't, and we've probably all been in context, maybe another church, and maybe sometimes here, maybe you felt that here more or less, but in some contexts, we felt more or less like the people were authentic. Maybe the pastor was more authentic in some contexts than others. Some of that is personality, some of it is the people that we connect with more, and some of it is genuinely that. It's just something that is so important to us, though, more so than how many people are in the seats, more so than how cool or relevant or fun our services, our people are. And some, let's be honest, some of us are cooler than others. I mean, the Chin family kind of leads the way, you know, in the cool factor. It's so funny. I didn't even mention this to Elliot, but some of you have met Elliot's sister, Ashley, and she posted the other day this picture of her and her dad shoe shopping. Now, I don't know how many of those boxes of shoes were dad's, but all I know is there was boxes of shoes as they were walking out, and I was like, that is, and I even commented, I was like, man, the Chin family, man, they shoe up, man, they raise the shoe game. So anyway, some of us are more cool than others, but in a city that embraces so much facade, we work hard to keep it real, and we really want to do that. I'll never forget being in Jordan and going to, oh my gosh, what's the famous place, the Indiana gym? Petra, yeah. I remember going there, and I didn't know this. I mean, I should have known. I should have done my homework, but I really had no idea what that was. Like, I thought the Indiana Jones temple and everything was in there, you know, for real. And it's just all a big facade. Like, there's nothing in there. And we don't want to live like that. We don't want to put on a beautiful face. We don't want to put on nice services. We don't want to have nice songs just in and of themselves. We want everything that we do to be driven by authentic relationships, which begins with our relationship with God. So we're committed. We're committed to cultivate an authentic relationship with God, with people inside the church community, and with people outside the community to live this out and truly embody this as a core value, though it doesn't just happen. So number 1, really 2 points here to this message. Number 1, authentic relationships require humility. And that's not sexy or fun or cool, but it's required. I mean, you can't really have authentic relationship with God and be proud, right? I mean, multiple places in the scriptures, it's God gives grace to the humble, and he stiff arms. Like, he rejects, he stiff arms the proud. And so when it comes to having an authentic relationship with God, that requires that we have some genuine humility before him, and we acknowledge that he's God and I'm not. But in our relationships with one another, right? I mean, who wants to be best friends with the proudest person? You know, I mean, we are attracted to humble people. We're attracted, in fact, 1 or 2 of our men's groups ago, someone shared kind of early in our conversation, something that was very vulnerable. And I think all of us have experienced this before, right? What happens when someone does that? Like when someone in a group, small group in particular, shares some vulnerability, some struggle. It's just like, it's kind of it's a paradox in a sense, right? Like it just, you're afraid to be that person, right? Like if I tell you what I'm really like, then my fear is that you're not going to like me anymore. So I'm gonna not be totally authentic. I'm not going to be totally humble before you, because if you found out what I'm really like, you might not like or respect me as much. But it's like the exact opposite that happens. The more vulnerable we are, when this happened, it was like all the guys were like leaning in a little bit more and sharing a little bit more. Let's rally around that. And that encourages more people to share. What about with people outside the church, right? So it's true with God, it's true with people inside the church. Is that also true with people outside? What do people outside the church think about people inside the church? Well, I think there's all kinds of stereotypical views, especially if they're like Simpson watching people, you know, or whatever. You pick the drama, you pick the soap opera, or you pick the sitcom or whatever it is. For the most part, pastors and Christians, I mean, I'm talking about like Jesus following, you know, loving Christians, are not always known as being the most authentic and humble. But it's required. John 13:34. Familiar to us, Jesus teaches this to us. He teaches us and he shows us and he demonstrates how to have authentic relationships. And he says here, a new commandment I give to you. This is, of course, right before Jesus is about to be arrested, go to the cross, give his life. He's at the end giving them the most important things. This is kind of known as the upper room discourse. I did a whole thing on this in my Devo from John 13 to 17 a few years ago now. I think that was back in 2020. A new command I give you, Jesus said, that you love one another. How do we do that? Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. How are people going to know that we're his disciples? You know, I mean, I don't know if the fish bumper sticker is very effective. In fact, I would say don't do that. We're probably never going to have church bumper stickers for the very reason that, you know, those times you're, you know, not really following Jesus in traffic. Don't want them to know that you're part of our church. Just kind of hide, you know, and that starts with, I don't want anybody to know I'm the pastor, you know, sometimes. Especially when I'm going in and out of Costco, I have to admit. And now my kids know. Elijah's gone to Costco with me a couple times. And they know, I think even Emmett recently said to me, I got to go in prayed up. If I drive into the... Now, lots of great Costco's out there. Gaithersburg one's not one of them. It's like the worst place to go in the world. But on the other hand, maybe it's the best place to go if you really want to cultivate love for people that are very different than you. I don't know. But by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Now, just a few minutes before Jesus told them to love one another just as he had loved them, he had washed the disciples' feet, which took a great deal of humility. The Son of God, which is worthy of them to fall down and bow down and worship, with which they did in many different contexts. And even Peter, you know, I'm unworthy, you know, in the boat, and in many other contexts. But here, the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, washes their feet and talked about the fact that he was about to be glorified. And again, that word glorify, you could kind of just think about that in the sense of significance and importance. He's about to become, you know, significantly known. That's kind of a way maybe to understand that. A reference to the fulfillment of his mission on earth to rescue us through his death, as he predicted what was about to happen. That God was about to be glorified through what he was going to do. And then the commandment to love was not new, but the standard was new. God has told his people to love, and even to love their neighbors as they love themselves, going back to Leviticus 19. But the standard was new. As I have loved you. This is Jesus, the Son of God. He demonstrated great humility when he became flesh. I mean, just the fact that God it was incarnated, became one like us, tabernacled, dwelt among us. He laid down his life to restore our relationship with God, which had been broken since mankind's rebellion in the Garden of Eden. I don't know that we think of ourselves as bad enough. I know we recently lost, Tim Keller, and that was one thing. I think one of the things that he really is helpful in clarifying is how awful we are. And yet, in our state of absolute awfulness, how incredibly good God is in that to meet us right where we needed to be met, and right where we need to be met every single day. Were you good enough yesterday so that the Spirit of this holy God would come and live in you? Where God would pour out and love you so much? Where he would provide good things for you, where he would surround you with people who love you, who really want to love the real you. Like, I wasn't, some days are better than others, but I think we think of like the common phrases in the culture and even in the church. We talk about what we deserve and all this and that. There's a place, don't get me wrong, sowing and reaping and all that kind of stuff, I understand, but when it comes to our perspective to God, the worse, I'm not saying, every day if you think about the bad stuff in your life, it'll be miserable. So I'm not suggesting that every day dwell on all the bad things, no. But it is important for us to recognize how desperate we are for God every single day. God has demonstrated and demonstrates, Romans 5:8, he demonstrates his love in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died. He has demonstrated loving well. This is really the mark of Christianity, isn't it? It's not knowledge, it's not rituals, it's not law-keeping, thank God. It's not sacrifices and blood that we need to shed. It's just humble love. That's the mark. That's what Jesus said. Don't argue with me, but Jesus said, this is how they're going to know that you're my followers. This is what connects us to Jesus and brings most glory to God. Love is really the core theme of John's letters. There's many examples, and I thought that I would highlight one this morning. But he's written many things. Really, they're filled with the call to love one another. Listen to just this one example in this small letter that John wrote, 1 John chapter 4. You're probably familiar with some of this. John wrote this: we love because he first loved us. So when we think about loving, it's hard to really understand love apart from how God has loved us. How has God loved you? You can think about things, right? Depending on maybe your love languages. Maybe if you're more of a gifts person, and Laura and I are so low on gifts. Not that we don't like giving and receiving gifts, but it's just not the first thing we think about. Some of you may be much higher in gifts, so you think about maybe it's things that God's provided for you, or so on and so forth. For me, I'm a high words and high touch person. And so when I think about God's love, I think about it in those sense. I think about what God said. I'm so enamored with his word and his promises, maybe more than some others. And so when we think about the way that God's loved us, we may think about it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it's the fact that we were a sinner and a rebel and absolutely going in the opposite direction. And in that state, God loved us. And he was calling us and wooing us. And by his grace, we said yes. And we began this experience of knowing his love. We love because he first loved us. Now, I want you to think about this as I read this passage. When you think about people who love and people who don't love. And it's easy for us to answer those kinds of things in the sense of our experience. But listen to what God's word says. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother or sister, whom they have seen, and we could apply this in the home. I talk to my kids all the time, about how, this is the place you're supposed to practice love. This is the context to learn how to love, so that when you go outside, you'll know how to love, and you'll be able to love well outside. It's not the other way around, although it feels that way. But really, John's talking about brothers and sisters in Christ. He's talking about in the church. For whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen, the people in the church who I did not choose, even if it's your blood brothers and sisters, you didn't choose them, nor did your parents, by the way. I didn't choose my sister, and my parents may not even have chose my sister, but she's my sister. And when you walked in here, you didn't choose. You could choose to go to another church. A lot of people do that. And even in families, you know, a lot of families leave their family. They're not very family-like. Man, John says, whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have seen. And he has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. So how do we love God? I mean, there's a sense in which we come and we worship and we sing. That's, I'm sure, you know, it's not that that can't put a smile or doesn't put a smile on God's face. We give, we contribute, we serve. Those are all ways that we can show God our love and demonstrate our love for him. But really the way that we show our love for God is by loving his children, who are our brothers and sisters. That is how we love God. Jesus' kind of love is humble, as seen in foot washing, and committed to obedience to God above all, a willingness to lay down our lives for others. So people are longing for authentic relationships and authentic community, aren't they? Just longing for it. So the first thing that non-Christians should notice when they join our gatherings is they should say something like, wow, these people really love each other. And I would say I know we're talking about humility, so I don't want to say proud, but I'm proud to be part of a church where I think people would experience that, and they would say that, and they would be blown away by many of you. I'm blown away. Many times I hear things that you're doing, and I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Praise God. At Restoration Church, we strongly believe that humility is a key ingredient that contributes to restoring authentic relationships. We believe that humility kills pride. So we're committed to serving one another. So we were created for authentic community, and when we see authentic relationships, they want to have it too. So not only do authentic relationships require humility, but number two, authentic relationships require proximity. Proximity. And I think it was Pastor Rod. Some of you got to hang out with Rod last weekend at the picnic. He was there. It was awesome. And I think it was him who originally kind of came to this conclusion as we were kind of doing life and beginning the process with our families to start the church. And we realized that if we didn't see each other for a while, if we didn't talk, it was easy for us to have suspicion. And so distance breeds suspicion in relationships. Proximity builds trust. And I think we found that in our community here when we meet together, when we're having meals together, when we're serving together, when we're really living as a family on mission together. The trust is there, the genuine love, the humility, and all that. But authentic relationships certainly require proximity, which Jesus modeled here. The next verse, verse 35. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. He's not saying you have to be. He's not using the word proximity there, but it's assumed, right? He said, he gets down on his knees and he washes the disciples' feet and he said, now, okay, I've given you an example, go love one another as I have loved you. And that takes closeness, it takes proximity. It's hard for people who are far from God to know that we belong to Jesus if we insist on living in isolation. And I like to use the term, we're going to talk about this next Sunday, it's hard to have proximity when you're in the stands or you're on the sideline or you're on the bench, but when you get in the game, in other words, when you show up, when you get involved, when you start to get plugged in, when you serve, when you're part of these things, now I'm close, and that can be a little bit harder, it can be messier, but that's the secret sauce for authenticity. How will they know that Jesus has the power to restore their lives, or restore their relationships rather, if we keep distant and we don't invite them into our lives to see how a Jesus-centered way of life is transforming us? That's part of the story part in Bless. So begin with prayer, listen, eat, serve, and then story. So as we're loving people in our community and we're inviting them in, and maybe they're even inviting us in. We just noticed this morning as Laura and I walked out onto the deck, our next door neighbors, they got, finally, after all these years, they bought a table and chairs out on the deck. So now we're hoping over the summer maybe we'll have some, fellowship over the rail, so to speak. Who knows? Our presence in the community should result in blessed neighborhoods. Starting right here at Lakelands Park Middle School, we talk about that a lot, in the Kentlands-Lakelands community, which we are increasingly being known for. A couple weeks ago, most of you know this, a group of 6 of us, several of you in the room, Ruth and Eric and Karen and Elijah, and who am I missing? There was one other. Charity. Why am I always forgetting Charity? And Caleb. So there was actually 7 of us. And we were able to cook and serve for the whole staff right in this room, 135 people, and was able to share briefly with them and say, hey, this right here where you're sitting, this is where we have our service on Sundays. And hopefully over the months and even the next couple of years, we'll begin to see some of the staff and the community here maybe join us. We had some really good interaction that day, and we are increasingly being known by the school. We started the food pantry. We're doing things with the counseling department and so on and so forth, and we're increasingly being known as a church that loves well. Our country, on the other hand, is devastatingly divided, isn't it? Doesn't seem to be getting better. I'm not sure what the hope is, but unfortunately, many Christians get sucked into it and add to the division. Identity politics, it's just literally killing us outside the church, and it's killing us inside the church. At Restoration Church, we believe that in order to cultivate authentic relationships, we must learn how to restore proximity and closeness. It's within a close, trusting relationship that we can talk about our different opinions about things without just fighting and seeing each other as the enemy. That's true with God, it's true with the people inside the church, and with people outside the church. But proximity requires intentional living. I was so blessed last night to officiate for a couple that I've spent a lot of time with. Laura got to go, and we stayed, and we partied a little bit. It was fun. We didn't dance, which was really unusual for Laura and I, because we can really dance. No, we can't dance. My mom can dance, and Karis is a good dancer. Maybe Elijah, but not Laura and I. But what was awesome is getting to know this couple and meeting this young couple who is so committed to intentional living. And I shared with them at the beginning of the process how, and I like to paint this picture for couples, like every couple gets somewhere. And sometimes the couple, they end up, separated or whatever. Every couple gets somewhere, right? Weston and Elizabeth, they're on the beginning of their journey. And you guys are going to get somewhere. Who knows what it's going to look like in 10 years? But some, and I would say a few couples, get somewhere on purpose, with intentionality and with vision. I'm going to be talking to the boys and I this week. I'm going to be talking to the boys and I. That sounds weird. But we're going to be chatting this week about vision and helping them kind of paint a picture of vision for their future, and I'm going to be working on that as well. But it is such a blessing to see a young couple that's really living, and I saw how they were fleshing that out. It's going to take intentional living for us to have proximity with God, obviously, to have a plan in which we read God's Word and we pray and we develop that kind of system in our lives where we're committed to being together inside the church, and we're really genuinely loving and committed to loving our neighbors. There's no way to be close with others in the church without showing up, saying yes to invitations, and maybe inviting others, like maybe for a meal or for something social or to a community group or to a bless event. Most of the success, quote unquote success, that God often gives in the church begins when his people simply say yes and show up. Maybe that's even been your experience. Maybe it took a big risk even to say yes to come to Restoration Church whenever you did. I just remember meeting Ruth. She's just in the middle. So remember, Ruth kind of stalked us for a while online. So this summer, no stalking. I mean, our sermons will be online, so yeah, I guess people can look at those. But and then she took the risk to come to the Oktoberfest and actually talk to us. And then that led to her visiting and family coming and all that. And maybe for you, you can remember. Don't forget. Like, what did it take for you? Maybe you can remember the first time you ever came into a church. There was a young lady, I'll never forget. I haven't seen her a whole lot. Saw her a few times after this, but I remember she came into our service. I think Karen was one of the first people to talk to her. And she told us that she came to this church because we were in a school, and this was the first time she ever came into a church service. And I was like, wow, what a, are we, like, is it weird? Like, what's that like for someone to come in? And so, it just takes intention. But that's what we want you to do this summer. We want you to show up. And really, we want to develop this just show up kind of mentality. Show up on Sundays. Show up to serve. Show up to celebrate. Show up to bless events. I know you can't show up to everything. We're not asking you to be busy with the church, but that you would be, I don't want to use the word busy, but that your life would be full of saying yes to whatever it is that God is leading you to do. So, for example, for 3 Sundays in July 9th, July 16th, and July 23rd, Laura and I are going to host our drinks and dessert out front of our house from 10 o'clock. Show up at 10. No, show up at 7. So from 7 to 10. Come at 7. You can leave at 8. You can leave at 9. You got to leave at 10. The fire goes out at 10. But come and get to know us. Come and get to know our family and others in the church family in a more relaxed setting. And who knows what God will do as we continue to deepen authentic relationships here at Restoration Church. So you're all invited. I'll tell you many other times, Ruth, but it is, 9, 16, and 23rd. So not next Sunday. Don't show up next Sunday. Next Sunday's the 2nd. I'm going to be catching my breath next week as I fly back red eye on Friday night. But then the next 3 weeks, those are kind of our 3 open weekends of the summer. It'll get busy a little bit after that. But anybody's invited. Everybody's invited. Bring your family. And our motto with that is bring a chair and something to share. Or just come. And, we'll try to have an extra chair. I'll stand. You can use my chair or whatever. We'll have some things to share. It'll be fun. Now, before we respond with a couple more songs, I'm going to pray. And if you would like to be prayed for, if you have some kind of special prayer request or that type of thing, I'll be right over here. Feel free to come forward. Or after service, if you have a prayer request and would like me to pray for you, please let me know. Elliot's going to come in just a minute, but let's pray and commit ourselves as a church together to lean in and live into authentic relationships that are humble and that are proximal or that are close. Please bow with me. Father, thank you for your word. And we've just looked at a couple of just simple verses from Jesus that have just reminded us we already know